Good morning. My name is Melissa Dunn. I am the Director of Education at United Way of the Midlands, and we would like to welcome Yvette Davis, Senior Stakeholder Liaison with Communications with the Internal Revenue Service. Yvette, you're here today to help us understand or better understand the three economic impact payments. And so I'm just going to turn it over to you. I may interject with a few questions, but probably not too many, and let you inform us of all of the things that we need to know about the economic impact payments.
All right, sounds good. Thank you so much, Melissa. I do appreciate this opportunity to speak to you all on behalf of the Internal Revenue Service about the economic impact payments. And there have been so many questions and so many the misnomers, if you will. I understand the need for this conversation. So I wanted to just go ahead and go through each one of them and just give you a little bit of a detail about what each of one of them entailed and what was included, the dollar amounts and things of that nature. And then we can just kind of go from there if that sounds good to you. All right. So when we talk about the economic impact payments, and there have been three issued in the last year and a half, the coronavirus, the pandemic hit everyone so very hard. So we were very fortunate that within the coronavirus, the pandemic, the IRS, along with Congress and everyone, created the economic impact payments. So let's talk about the very first one. Let me just say this. Everything that I'm going to say today, you will be able to find that information on our website at www.irs.gov and just do a slash EIP or economic impact payment. Okay. So, generally speaking, when it comes to the first economic impact payment, if you are a US citizen or a US resident alien, you were not claimed by anyone as a dependent on their tax return, and as long as you have a social security number that's just valid for employment, for example, then the IRS automatically issued you for the first economic payment $1,200. That's for an individual, but for a joint couple married filing joint, they would have received a check for up to $2,400. Okay. And that's for folks whose adjusted gross income did not exceed specified thresholds. For example, if you are married filing a joint return and your adjusted gross income was under $150,000, you would have received the maximum $2,400. As a single person or head of household, if your income, adjusted gross income, was under $112,000, $112,500, then you would have received the entire amount. Okay. For individuals, the threshold is $75,000 or less. Then you would have received the maximum dollar amount. Now, payments were reduced by about 5% of the amount by which your adjusted gross income exceeded the thresholds that we just talked about. Additionally, those with qualifying children received up to an additional $500 per qualifying child under the age of 17. You were not eligible for the first payment if any of the following that I'm going to share with you applies. Okay, so if you were claimed as a dependent on someone else's tax return, for example, a child or a student, and my daughter fit into that category, she was very disappointed. Uh, so if you have a student in college who you still claimed as a dependent on your tax return, then that dependent did not qualify to receive the economic impact payment. And I'm going to switch over here for just a moment here. So additionally, you would not have received it if you were a non-resident alien. You would not receive it if you did not have a social security number that was valid for employment. Okay. So that those are just the general things surrounding that first economic impact payment. I'm going to circle back to that in just a few minutes to talk to those folks who may not have received exactly what they thought they were entitled to when we get to the recovery rebate, okay? Now, for economic impact payment number 2, generally, this was distributed to everyone if you were, again, a US citizen or, again, a US resident alien. Then those folks may have been eligible to receive that second economic impact payment of $600 for an individual, or for those folks married following a joint return, they would have received the max of $1,200. Okay, plus for those qualifying children, again under age 17, that dollar amount went up to $600 for the second economic impact payment. Okay, so if you have a dependent or a child who was not a dependent of another, if you had a child who was not your dependent in 2019, they would have been qualified to receive their own economic impact payment at that time. But if they were dependent on your 2019 or 2020 tax return, again, that child, that student, did not receive that economic impact payment. Does that make sense? Okay, awesome. So now, just like with the first economic impact payment, there are thresholds that would put you in the realm of receiving these payments automatically. So for the second economic impact payment, it's just similar to the very first one, right? If your adjusted gross income for a married filing joint couple was $150,000 or less, then you would have received the maximum amount of that economic impact payment. For those individuals or head of household, if their adjusted gross income was under $112,500, they would have qualified for the maximum amount. For those individuals, for individuals, single individuals, if their income, adjusted gross income, was $75,000 or less, then they would have received that full $1,200. Okay. And just as with the previous one, there are thresholds that would have knocked them out or reduced the amount of that economic impact payment that they would have received. Is still that the payment would have been reduced by 5% of the amount by which your adjusted gross income exceeded that threshold until it went down to zero. Okay, so for the second economic impact payment, folks were not eligible for a payment if any of the following applied. If, again, they were claimed as a dependent on someone else's 2019 tax return, again, that is the category of that child or that student in college who may have been claimed as a dependent. Those folks who did not have a social security number that's again valid for employment issued before the due date of your 2019 tax return, which would have been April, well, yeah, April 2020. If they did not have a valid social security number for employment, they would not qualify to receive this. If those folks who are non-resident aliens would not qualify, then they had to learn from the IRS had to learn from its mistakes, right? There were payments issued to those folks who were deceased at certain points during the year, right? So now for the second economic impact payment, someone who was deceased before 2020 would not qualify to receive that economic impact payment, and they would not have been sent that economic impact payment. Okay, so that's the nuts and bolts of the first and second economic impact payments. But I wanted to add in a note here for those folks who received a portion of that economic impact payment and thought, hey, I really think I qualified to receive more than I actually received. If that is the case, then the IRS created the recovery rebate credit. Okay. And this is a credit that for those folks, when they filed that 2020 tax return, they would have indicated on line 30 of that 1040 return that the dollar amount of the first or second economic impact payment they received. At that point in time, if it is deemed that they were qualified to receive more, than the amount that was sent initially, there would have been a reconciliation, and they would have gotten the benefit of whatever the dollar amount was that they didn't get the first time around when they filed their 2020 tax return. That's why the IRS was pushing folks and encouraging folks so much so to go ahead and file that 2020 tax return as soon as possible, because those there were some folks who were so bothered that they did not receive the full amount that they thought they were eligible to receive for the first or second economic impact payments. The first two rounds of the economic impact payments were actually in advance of the recovery rebate credit. Folks didn't quite understand that. So most eligible people, while they had already received the payments, they would not qualify to get an additional recovery rebate because they already received the full amount that they were entitled to. But again, the IRS was able to add to the law, and they were able to create the rebate recovery credit to make sure that everyone received the total amount that they were entitled to. At that time, when this was all going on in 2020, we had the Get My Payment tool. You may recall that particular tool where you could go in and you could see the dollar amount that you were due to receive, the dollar amount that was issued, and how it was actually issued to you, right? So for those who may be eligible for the recovery rebate credit for 2020, if they did not get the dollar amount they were entitled to for the first or second economic impact payment, or once again received less than the full amount, they could claim this recovery rebate credit with their 2020 tax return. Even those folks who don't normally file a tax return. That's another little caveat that a lot of folks missed. So there are folks out there who did not have a filing requirement, but they were still entitled, or they could be eligible for these economic impact payments. But IRS would not necessarily know that. Okay, so they had to file those tax returns. All right. So to claim to cover the credit, again, they just had to file that 2020 tax return, even if they were not required to file the tax return. Okay. So those are the nuts and bolts of the second economic impact payment and the recovery rebate credit. Now let's talk about the third economic impact payment. The IRS has been busy in this pandemic, okay, trying to push out all of these payments and making sure everybody who needed it received it in a timely fashion. And just a side note for those folks who still push paper tax returns, I just want to encourage you to consider electronic filing, indirect deposit, for your to receive your refunds. Because side note, once again, those folks who actually participate in direct deposit were the first ones to actually receive these economic impact payments. Okay, that's a side note. So for this third round of economic impact payments, this was authorized by the American Rescue Plan Act of 2021. And this one is an advance payment of the tax year 2021, right? The recovery rebate for 2021. The first two were in advance of the 2020 recovery rebate credit, okay? The IRS started sending the third economic impact payments to eligible individuals around the middle of March of this year. And the third economic impact payment amounts were a lot more than the first and second. $1,400 specifically for an eligible individual with a valid Social Security number, $2,800 for those folks married filing a joint return if both spouses had Social Security numbers, or even if one spouse had a valid Social Security number and one was an active military member of the military, then they would have received that $2,800. Okay. $1,400 for each qualifying dependent with a valid Social Security number. And that also includes those children who may have been adopted, and they would have already had an ATIN or adoption taxpayer identification number issued by the IRS. Okay, most eligible individuals should have already received their third economic impact payment automatically, and there was no additional action needed to be taken, right? The IRS was able to use available information to determine the eligibility and issued the third payment to those folks who filed that 2020 tax return, right? Or even those folks who filed the 2019 tax return, if the 2020 tax return was still being processed. Because again, those returns were being sent in 2020 when the IRS was going through a pandemic, just like everyone else. So there were some delays in processing those returns. But as those returns for 2020 were processed, that third economic impact payment was sent out, or the IRS simply used the 2019 tax return information to send out that $1,400. Okay. Um, the third economic impact payment was eligible for people who were also recipients of federal benefits like SNAP and things of that nature. Those folks who probably don't usually file a tax return. Again, those folks were eligible to receive those funds. Okay. For eligibility, most eligible people didn't need to take any additional action to get that third payment. Due to new income limitations for this third economic impact payments, some of the individuals who received the first and second one would not qualify to receive this third one. Okay. Generally, someone is eligible for a full amount of the third economic impact payment. Again, if they are a U.S. citizen, U.S. resident alien, and their spouse would also qualify if they filed a joint return and they are not a dependent of another taxpayer. Okay. Their adjusted gross income for the third economic impact payment cannot be more than $150,000 for those folks married filing a joint return, $112,500 for those filing as head of household, or $75,000 for eligible individuals using a single filing status, for example. Okay, so there were some differences, as I've already noted a couple of them, with the third economic impact payment from the earlier payments. So there is a different income phase out amounts. Those amounts kind of changed. So for example, payments begin to be reduced for individuals with adjusted gross income of more than $75,000 or $150,000 for married filing joint. However, the reduction of the payments end at $80,000 for individuals and $160,000 for married filing joint with the third economic impact payment. So people above these levels won't receive any for any of the third economic impact payment. Okay. And obviously the payment amounts are different, right? Most families received or will receive $1,400 per person, including all dependents claimed on their tax return. Now, side note, my daughter thought that meant that she would receive a $1,400 check because she was a dependent, right? Not so. All right. Typically, this means that a single person with no dependents would simply get $1,400, while married filers with two dependents would get $5,600. Qualifying dependents expanded with this particular economic impact payment, the third one. Unlike the first two, the third the third payment is not restricted to children under 17. Eligible individuals will get a payment based on all of their qualifying dependents claimed on that tax return, including older relatives, like college students, adults with disabilities, parents, and grandparents. Okay, so this one expanded to a lot more people. Okay. All right, so let me share some final tips. Okay, just a few things I wanted to make sure I said with this session. People who receive the first and or second economic impact payments also received a couple of notices. The first one, the notice 144. The second economic payment, you received the notice 144B. These notices need to be kept for with their tax records because you want to once again reconcile what you actually received with what is actually listed when you file that tax return. And the question always comes about, well, does this mean this income is taxed, is taxable income? It is not taxable income. It is not taxed at all. The main purpose of reconciling with those notices is to make sure, as I stated before, that you received the exact dollar amount that you were entitled to. Okay, if you did not get the full amount the first time around, by entering what was sent on the 1444 or 1444B, then if you missed out on any of the funding, you would get it when you filed that tax return. Okay, for the third economic impact payment, the notice 1444C was sent out. Once again, letting people know this is the dollar amount that you received and this is how you received it. Direct deposit, a check was sent out, or one of those prepaid cards. Okay. Keep the third economic impact payment notice with your tax records for 2021 for when you file your return next year. For security reasons, the IRS mails these notices to each recipient's last known address, normally within 15 days after the payment was actually sent out. And it's especially important for people to keep this notice if they think their payments were wrong. Okay. So when you file your 2020 or 2021 tax return, again, you can have that information and reconcile those credits to get what you are actually entitled to. Okay. The second tip and final tip, people who don't normally file tax returns, please understand that you still may be eligible for all three of these economic impact payments. And even if you receive federal benefits, you may still qualify for these stimulus or these economic impact payments. Uh, this includes folks who may not have a permanent address, right? It also includes folks who may not have a bank account or income. So if you're eligible and didn't get the first and second or third payment, or got less than that amount that you were entitled to for 2020, there's a recovery rebate credit. For 2021, there will be yet another recovery rebate credit. Again, for more information about the economic impact payments, please visit our website at www.irs.gov/EIP. That's it.
Yvette, thank you so much. And we look forward to hearing from you again about understanding the advanced child tax credit. This information was very informative, and hopefully, our listeners will go to the IRS website to read more information if they have other questions. So,
Uh,
thank you for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate you.